The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Palace as Detective Inspector Sarah adjusted her earpiece, receiving the final briefing from her superior. She had been chosen for this delicate assignment not because of her rank, but because of her discretion. Royal protection was a world where secrets were currency, and Sarah had proven herself capable of keeping the most valuable ones locked away. Queen's daily schedule included a private visit to a children's charity in East London, a cause close to her heart since her younger days. The routine security sweep of her vehicle should have been standard procedure, nothing more than checking for tracking devices or potential threats. But as Sarah ran her gloved hands beneath the leather seats of the Royal, her fingers touched something that shouldn't have been there. Hidden in a small compartment behind the driver's seat was a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Sarah's training told her to report the discovery immediately, but something about the desperate way the journal had been concealed made her pause. The cover bore no royal insignia, no official markings that would suggest it belonged to palace records. Instead, it looked personal, intimate, and somehow fragile despite its careful hiding place. As she opened the journal, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The handwriting was unmistakably feminine, written in blue ink that had faded to purple over time. The first entry was dated nearly 30 years ago, long before had become queen, even before she had married into the royal family. The words on the page spoke of love, but not the kind that made headlines or graced magazine covers. This was raw, painful, and real. "Today I held her for the last time," the entry began. "My sweet Elizabeth, barely 3 months old, with her father's eyes and my stubborn chin. The social worker was kind, but her kindness couldn't ease the breaking of my heart. I'm not ready to be a mother, not in the way she deserves. The world expects so much from women like me, but they don't see the scared girl inside who can barely take care of herself." Sarah's hands trembled as she continued reading. This was a secret that could reshape everything the public thought they knew about the queen consort. The journal detailed the story of a young woman who had given birth to a daughter and made the agonizing decision to place her for adoption. The father was mentioned only as J, someone who couldn't acknowledge the child publicly due to his own circumstances. Each entry revealed more of the emotional journey. There were sleepless nights when Young would drive to the park where she had last held her daughter, sitting in her car and crying until dawn. There were birthdays marked with silent prayers and Christmas mornings that felt empty despite the luxury surrounding her. The guilt and love warred on every page, creating a portrait of a woman carrying a secret that was slowly consuming her from the inside. Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the story as she read about desperate attempts to follow her daughter's life from afar. Through careful inquiries and discreet private investigators, she had learned that Elizabeth had been adopted by a loving family in Scotland. The little girl had grown into a bright student, then a young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher. But could never reach out, could never reveal the truth, because doing so might destroy not just her own carefully constructed life, but the peace her daughter had found with her adoptive family. The journal entries became less frequent as the years passed, but they never stopped completely. Even after marriage to Prince Charles, even as she stepped into the spotlight and learned to navigate the complex world of royal duty, she continued to write. The entries showed a woman torn between her public role and her private grief, between the family she had chosen and the child she had lost. One entry, written just 5 years ago, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Today I saw her on the news," had written. "Elizabeth has become the headmistress of a primary school in Edinburgh. She was giving an interview about education reform, and I could see so much of myself in her gestures, the way she tilted her head when thinking. She has become everything I hoped she would be, and I am proud beyond words. But I am also heartbroken because I can never tell her so." As Sarah closed the journal, her mind raced with the implications of what she had discovered. This wasn't just a personal secret. It was information that could impact the monarchy itself. Questions would be raised about succession, about why this child had been kept secret, about what other truths might be hidden behind the palace walls. The media would have a feeding frenzy, and its carefully rebuilt reputation would be shattered overnight. But there was something else troubling Sarah about the discovery. The journal had been hidden recently, the concealment mechanism still bearing fresh scratches. Someone had wanted this found, or at least wanted it safe from prying eyes. The question was whether that someone was herself, or whether this was evidence of something more sinister. Sarah's radio crackled to life, reminding her that the Queen's departure was scheduled in 20 minutes. She had to make a decision that would affect not just her career, but the lives of everyone involved in this decades-old secret. The journal felt heavy in her hands, weighted with the emotional burden of a mother's love and loss. Looking around the garage, Sarah noticed that the security cameras in this section had been mysteriously turned away from the vehicle, angled toward the walls instead of their usual positions. Someone with access to the palace systems had deliberately created a blind spot. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a setup, but whether it was meant to protect or expose her remained unclear. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the garage, and Sarah quickly made her choice. Instead of reporting the discovery immediately, she slipped the journal into her jacket and resumed her inspection of the vehicle. Her partner, Detective Sergeant Michael, appeared around the corner with his usual professional demeanor. "Everything clear?" he asked, running his own hands along the exterior of the... "All secure," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. "Just finishing up the interior check." As they completed their inspection and prepared to give the all-clear for the Queen's departure, Sarah felt the weight of the journal against her ribs. She had made a decision that went against every protocol she had been trained to follow, but something about the raw emotion in those pages had reached her on a human level that transcended duty and regulations. 20 minutes later, Queen appeared in the garage, resplendent in a navy blue coat and matching hat. She moved with the grace that had taken years to perfect, but Sarah noticed something in her eyes that she had never seen before. There was a vulnerability there, a sadness that seemed to deepen once gaze briefly met hers. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Sarah said with a respectful nod. "Good morning, Inspector," replied, her voice carrying its usual warmth. But as she settled into the backseat of Sarah saw her hand instinctively reach toward the area where the journal had been hidden. The slight frown that crossed her features confirmed Sarah's suspicions about who had placed it there. As the royal convoy pulled away from Palace, Sarah remained in the garage, the journal still hidden in her jacket. She had stumbled upon a secret that had the power to change everything, and now she held the responsibility of deciding what to do with it. The question wasn't just about following protocol anymore. It was about understanding the difference between truth and consequences, between duty and compassion. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of palace life continuing around her. Sarah pulled out her phone and stared at the number for her supervisor, her finger hovering over the call button. In that moment, she realized that some discoveries were too important to handle through normal channels. This wasn't just about palace security or royal protection. It was about a mother's love, a daughter's identity, and the complex web of human emotions that existed behind even the most public of lives. Sarah made her second decision of the day, one that would set in motion a chain of events that none of them could have anticipated. Instead of calling her supervisor, she slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked toward the palace archives. If she was going to protect this secret, she needed to understand its full scope. And if Queen's past was about to catch up with her, Sarah wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. The palace archives were housed in a basement level that most staff never saw, accessible only to those with the highest security clearance. Sarah's credentials as a royal protection officer granted her access, but she had never needed to venture into these depths before. The corridors were lined with climate-controlled rooms filled with centuries of royal history, from official documents to personal correspondence that would never see the light of day. Thornton, the chief archivist, looked up from her desk with surprise as Sarah approached. Had been the keeper of royal secrets for nearly 4 decades, her discretion legendary among palace staff. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck like armor against prying eyes. "Inspector," said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had served 4 monarchs. "This is unexpected. What brings you to my domain?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then decided that partial honesty might serve her better than complete deception. "I need to research some historical records, possibly relating to adoptions or births from the 1990s. It's connected to a security matter I'm investigating." His expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed the slight stiffening of her shoulders. In the world of palace intrigue, even the most innocent requests could hide deeper meanings. "That's rather specific," said carefully. "Might I ask what type of security concern requires such historical research?" "I'm trying to verify some information that's come to light," Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. "Information that could potentially be used to embarrass or blackmail a member of the royal family. I need to understand the facts before I can determine how to proceed." The older woman studied Sarah for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust her with access to information that could reshape royal history. Finally, stood and walked to a locked filing cabinet in the corner of her office. She had a set of keys and gestured for Sarah to follow. "There are some things," said as they walked deeper into the archives, "that are kept separate from the official records. Personal matters that never made it into the history books, decisions made by family members that were deemed too sensitive for public consumption. If you're looking for what I think you're looking for, you won't find it in the standard files." They stopped in front of a door marked with nothing more than the number 7, used 2 different keys to unlock it, then stepped inside and turned on the lights. The room was smaller than the others, containing only a dozen filing cabinets and a single desk. But Sarah could sense the weight of the secrets contained within these walls. "Before I show you anything," said, turning to face Sarah directly, "I need you to understand something. The information in this room exists because sometimes doing the right thing requires bending the rules. Sometimes protecting people means keeping secrets that could destroy them if they ever came to light. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" Sarah thought about the journal still hidden in her jacket, about the raw emotion in its handwriting, about the vulnerability she had seen in the Queen's eyes that morning. "I understand," she said quietly. Nodded and walked to a specific filing cabinet. She a thin folder and placed it on the desk. "Elizabeth Parker," she said simply. "Born March 15, 1994, adopted through a private agency in London when she was 3 months old. The birth mother's name was sealed, but certain records were kept for security purposes." Sarah's heart raced as she opened the folder. The birth certificate listed the mother only as C. Shand, the name had used before her marriage to Prince Charles. The father was listed as J. Parker Bowles, confirming what Sarah had suspected from reading the journal. This wasn't just any secret child. This was a child born during his first marriage, a complication that would have been devastating to navigate in the public eye of the 1990s. "The adoption was handled privately," continued, "to ensure complete confidentiality for all parties involved. The adoptive family, Robert and Helen Mitchell, were thoroughly vetted but never told the identity of the birth parents. They believed they were adopting the child of a young woman who simply couldn't provide proper care." As Sarah read through the file, she began to understand the complexity of the situation. Elizabeth had been born during a turbulent time in life, when her marriage to Parker Bowles was crumbling and her relationship with Charles was still a closely guarded secret. The pregnancy would have been scandalous enough on its own, but the timing made it even more complicated. "There's more," said softly, opening another folder. "Elizabeth Mitchell, as she became known, has had quite a remarkable life. She excelled in school, earned a degree in education from the University of Edinburgh, and has become one of Scotland's most respected educators. She married David 5 years ago, and they have twin daughters. By all accounts, she has built a wonderful life for herself." Sarah studied the photographs in the file, images that had been discreetly gathered over the years to ensure Elizabeth's well-being. The resemblance to was subtle but unmistakable in certain angles, the shape of her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. But more than physical resemblance, there was something in Elizabeth's bearing that spoke of the same strength and grace that had learned to project. "Has she ever tried to find her birth parents?" Sarah asked. Shook her head. "Quite the opposite, actually. She's expressed gratitude for her adoption and has never shown any interest in pursuing her biological origins. She considers Robert and Helen Mitchell to be her true parents in every way that matters." This information added another layer of complexity to Sarah's dilemma. Elizabeth had found peace with her life as it was, built a family and career without the shadow of her royal connection. Revealing the truth now might not be seen as a gift, but as a destruction of the life she had carefully constructed. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked. The older woman was quiet for a moment, then sat down across from Sarah at the small desk. "Because I believe that someone is planning to expose this information," she said. "There have been inquiries, subtle ones, but inquiries nonetheless. Someone has been asking questions about adoption records from that time period, about whereabouts during certain months in 1993 and 1994. I suspect that whoever is behind this investigation has already pieced together most of the truth." Sarah felt a chill run through her. The journal hidden in the car wasn't just its way of keeping her memories safe. It might have been placed there as evidence for someone who was already building a case. "Do you know who's been making these inquiries?" "That's what worries me," said. The questions have come through different channels, different people, as if someone is being very careful not to leave a trail. But the pattern suggests someone with significant resources and patience. This isn't a tabloid journalist looking for a quick story. This is someone playing a much longer game. As they spoke, Sarah began to piece together a disturbing picture. Someone had spent considerable time and effort investigating's past, and they had likely discovered the truth about Elizabeth. The journal in the car might have been placed there as a final piece of evidence, or as a way to force hand before the information was released publicly. "There's something else you need to know," said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elizabeth doesn't know about her royal connection, but someone close to her might. 3 months ago, a man approached her adoptive father, Robert Mitchell. He claimed to be researching family genealogies for a historical project, but his questions were very specific about Elizabeth's adoption and her birth parents." Sarah's blood ran cold. If someone was already making contact with Elizabeth's family, then the secret was on the verge of being exposed, whether wanted it to be or not. The question was no longer whether to reveal the truth, but how to control the narrative when it inevitably came to light. "What did Robert Mitchell tell this man?" Sarah asked. "Nothing, thankfully. Robert has always been fiercely protective of his daughter's privacy. He told the man that he had no information about Elizabeth's birth parents and asked him to leave. But the fact that someone is getting that close to the truth means we're running out of time." Sarah stood up and paced to the small window that provided the room's only natural light. Through the glass, she could see the palace gardens where tourists gathered daily, hopping for a glimpse of the royalty that lived behind these walls. None of them could imagine the human dramas playing out in these hidden chambers, the weight of secrets that had been carried for decades. "What do you think I should do?" Sarah asked, turning back to. The archivist removed her glasses and cleaned them carefully, a gesture that seemed to buy her time to consider her words. "I think," she said finally, "that you should consider what's best for everyone involved. Elizabeth has a right to know her true heritage, but she also has a right to the life she's built without that knowledge. Has carried this burden for 30 years, but she also chose to keep it secret to protect her daughter. And the monarchy itself has a stake in how this information comes to light." Stood and walked to another filing cabinet, withdrawing one final folder. "But there's one more thing you should know before you make your decision," she said. "Elizabeth Mitchell isn't just any successful educator. 6 months ago, she was appointed to lead a new royal initiative for educational reform in Scotland. She's been working closely with the palace, though she has no idea of her connection to it. Fate, it seems, has been pushing this secret toward the surface, whether we wanted it there or not." As Sarah absorbed this final revelation, she realized that the situation was far more complex than she had initially understood. Elizabeth was already connected to the royal family through her professional work, already moving in circles that might eventually lead her to discover the truth on her own. The secret that had worked so hard to keep was becoming increasingly impossible to maintain. The weight of the journal in Sarah's jacket seemed to increase as she considered her options. She held in her hands the power to reunite a mother with her daughter, to complete a story of love and loss that had been suspended for 3 decades. But she also held the power to destroy the carefully constructed lives of everyone involved, to create a scandal that would echo through the monarchy for generations. As locked away the files and prepared to escort Sarah back to the main level of the palace, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not turn the journal over to her superiors, at least not yet. But she would also not keep this secret to herself much longer. Instead, she would do something that violated every protocol in her training manual. She would speak directly to Queen about what she had discovered and give her the chance to control how this story unfolded. Opportunity to speak with Queen privately came sooner than Sarah had expected. Upon returning from her charity visit to East London, requested a security briefing about the morning's inspection, claiming she had noticed some unusual activity around her vehicle before departure. It was an unprecedented request, but one that gave Sarah the opening she needed. They met in private study, a warm room filled with family photographs and personal mementos that revealed glimpses of the woman behind the crown. Sarah had been in the presence of royalty before, but never in such an intimate setting, never with such a momentous secret weighing between them. Sat behind her mahogany desk, still wearing the navy coat from her morning engagement, though she had removed her formal hat. "Inspector," began, her voice carrying the measured tone she used in public appearances. "I understand you conducted a thorough inspection of my vehicle this morning. Was there anything of concern?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation during her walk back from the archives, but now, faced with the Queen's direct gaze, all her prepared words seemed inadequate. The journal felt like it was burning through her jacket, demanding to be acknowledged. "Your Majesty," Sarah said carefully, "I did discover something during the inspection that I believe requires your immediate attention. Something that was clearly placed in your vehicle with great care and intention." His composure remained perfect, but Sarah noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "I see, and what exactly did you find?" Sarah reached into her jacket and the leather journal, placing it gently on the desk between them. The moment it appeared, his carefully maintained mask cracked, revealing a flash of vulnerability so raw that Sarah felt like an intruder witnessing it. "Where did you find this?" asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden in a compartment behind the driver's seat," Sarah replied. "Your Majesty, I want you to know that I haven't reported this discovery through normal channels. I felt that you should have the opportunity to explain the situation before any official action is taken." Stared at the journal for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap as if touching it might make the situation more real than she was prepared to handle. When she finally looked up, her eyes held tears that she was fighting to control. "How much did you read?" she asked. "Enough to understand that this is about your daughter," Sarah said gently. "Elizabeth Parker, who became Elizabeth Mitchell after her adoption in 1994. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession at trial. Closed her eyes and took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, Sarah saw not the queen consort, but a mother who had been carrying an impossible secret for 30 years. "I never intended for anyone to find that," said. "I've kept it hidden for so long, but lately I've been feeling like someone was watching me, investigating my past. I thought if I kept it with me, it would be safer than leaving it at home or in any official location." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Your Majesty, I've done some research, and I believe your instincts were correct. Someone has been making inquiries about adoption records from that time period, and they've even approached Elizabeth's adoptive family. I think someone is planning to expose this information, whether you're prepared or not." The color drained from his face. "They contacted Robert and Helen about 3 months ago. A man claiming to research genealogies approached Robert Mitchell with very specific questions about Elizabeth's adoption. He didn't reveal anything, but the fact that someone got that close to the truth suggests they're well-resourced and determined." Stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, her silhouette framed against the afternoon light. For several minutes, she remained silent, and Sarah could see the weight of 3 decades of secrecy pressing down on her shoulders. "You have to understand," said finally, "when I made the decision to place Elizabeth for adoption, I was barely more than a child myself. My marriage was falling apart, my relationship with Charles was impossible and dangerous to acknowledge publicly, and I was drowning in expectations I couldn't meet. I thought I was doing what was best for her." Sarah remained quiet, understanding that this might be the first time in 30 years that had spoken these words aloud to another person. "Every day since then," continued, "I've wondered if I made the right choice. I followed her life from a distance, celebrated her successes, worried through her challenges, loved her in the only way I could. But I've never been able to be her mother, and now I'm terrified that revealing the truth will destroy the life she's built without me." "There's something else you should know," Sarah said gently. "Elizabeth has been appointed to lead a new royal initiative for educational reform in Scotland. She's been working closely with palace staff, though she has no idea of her connection to the family. It seems that fate has been drawing her closer to this world, whether any of us intended it or not." Turned sharply from the window, her eyes wide with surprise. "She's working with the palace." "For the past 6 months. Her reputation as an educator is exceptional, and she was recommended for the position by several education ministers. It's entirely based on her merit, but it does mean that she's already moving in royal circles." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. After 30 years of careful separation, mother and daughter were now connected through the very institution that had made their relationship impossible to maintain. "I need to think about this," said, returning to her chair behind the desk. She picked up the journal with trembling hands, holding it as if it were made of glass. "If someone is planning to expose this information, then perhaps it's time to consider controlling the narrative ourselves." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly what I was thinking, Your Majesty. If we can arrange for you to meet Elizabeth privately to explain the situation before it becomes public, then at least she'll hear the truth from you rather than reading it in a tabloid." "But what if she doesn't want to know?" asked, voicing the fear that had kept her silent for so many years. "What if learning the truth destroys the peace she's found with her life? What if she hates me for giving her away?" These were questions that had no easy answers, but Sarah had seen enough of life to know that truth, however painful, was usually better than living with secrets that could explode at any moment. "Your Majesty," Sarah said carefully, "I've read enough of your journal to understand the love you've always felt for Elizabeth. That kind of love doesn't just disappear, and I believe that somewhere deep down, she must feel the absence of something, even if she doesn't know what it is. Maybe the real question isn't whether she'll understand your choice, but whether she deserves the chance to make her own choice about having you in her life." Was quiet for a long time, staring at the journal in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger, more determined. "If I'm going to do this," she said, "I want to do it properly. I don't want Elizabeth to be ambushed by this information or feel pressured to react in any particular way. I want her to have time to process the truth and decide for herself what kind of relationship, if any, she wants to have with me." Sarah felt a surge of admiration for the woman sitting across from her. Despite the fear and uncertainty, was choosing to prioritize her daughter's well-being over her own comfort. "How do you want to proceed?" Sarah asked. "I want you to help me arrange a meeting," said. "Something private, away from the palace and away from her work with the education initiative. I want her to meet me as a person first, not as the queen consort. And I want you there as a witness, someone who can verify the truth of what I'm telling her." It was an unusual request, but Sarah understood the reasoning behind it. Having a neutral third party present would give Elizabeth someone to turn to for verification and support, while also protecting from any accusations of impropriety. "I'll need to research Elizabeth's schedule and find an appropriate opportunity," Sarah said. "Something that won't seem suspicious or unusual to her or anyone observing her movements." Nodded, then opened her desk drawer and a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. "This was my mother's," she said, holding it up to catch the light. "I planned to give it to Elizabeth when she was born, but of course I never had the chance. I've kept it all these years, hoping that someday." She didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. The locket represented all the moments of motherhood that had missed, all the birthday presents and Christmas gifts and graduation celebrations that had passed without her. "I'll help you arrange the meeting," Sarah said. "But I need you to understand that once we set this in motion, there's no going back. Elizabeth will know the truth and will have to live with whatever consequences that brings." Clasped the locket in her hands and looked directly at Sarah. "I've been living with the consequences of keeping this secret for 30 years, she said. "It's time to find out what the consequences of telling the truth might be." As they finalized their plans, Sarah couldn't help but think about the complexity of the situation they were navigating. This wasn't just about reuniting a mother with her daughter. It was about two women who had lived their entire adult lives without each other, who had become successful and strong in their own ways, and who were about to discover whether the bonds of blood could bridge 3 decades of separation. The afternoon light was fading as Sarah prepared to leave the study. She had entered this room as a security officer investigating a potential breach of protocol. She was leaving as a conspirator in one of the most delicate family reunions in royal history. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. "Inspector," said as Sarah reached the door, "thank you for bringing this to me directly instead of following standard procedure. I know it wasn't an easy decision to make." Sarah turned back to face the Queen. "Sometimes, Your Majesty, the right thing to do isn't the same as the proper thing to do. I learned a long time ago that protecting people sometimes means protecting them from the very systems that are supposed to keep them safe." As Sarah left the palace that evening, the journal safely returned to his possession. She felt like she was carrying a different kind of secret now. Not just the knowledge of Elizabeth's existence, but the weight of a mother's hope and 30 years of accumulated love waiting for the chance to finally express itself. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself sitting in a quiet in Edinburgh's old town, watching the entrance with the trained eye of someone who had spent years in surveillance. The Elephant House was busy enough to provide cover for a private conversation, but intimate enough that they could speak without being overheard. She had chosen it carefully after researching Elizabeth Mitchell's routine, discovering that she often stopped here for tea after her afternoon meetings with Education Ministry officials. Elizabeth arrived exactly on schedule, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon sunlight as she paused at the entrance. Sarah recognized her immediately from the photographs in the palace archives, but seeing her in person revealed details that pictures couldn't capture. The way she moved with quiet confidence, the genuine smile she offered to the hostess, the small gesture of courtesy as she held the door for an elderly gentleman behind her. All of it spoke to the character that had impressed educators across Scotland. "Ms. Mitchell," Sarah approached with the careful smile of someone making a professional introduction. "I'm Detective Inspector Sarah. I believe my office called about scheduling a brief meeting regarding the security protocols for the Education Reform Initiative." Elizabeth's expression was politely professional, though Sarah detected a slight confusion in her eyes. "Of course, Inspector, though I have to admit, I wasn't expecting to discuss security protocols in. I apologize for the unusual venue," Sarah said, guiding Elizabeth to a corner table she had reserved. "But given the sensitive nature of some aspects of the initiative, we thought a more informal setting might be appropriate. Actually, there's someone I'd like you to meet who can explain the situation better than I can." As if summoned by the words, appeared at their table, dressed simply in a cream-colored sweater and dark trousers, looking more like someone's elegant aunt than the Queen Consort of England. Sarah had been amazed at how different she looked without the formal attire and elaborate hats that usually accompanied her public appearances. "Elizabeth," said softly, her voice trembling slightly despite her obvious efforts to remain composed. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Elizabeth's confusion deepened as she looked between Sarah and this woman who seemed vaguely familiar but whom she couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been introduced." "My name is," the Queen said simply, taking the seat across from Elizabeth. "And I've been waiting 30 years for the chance to have this conversation with you." The recognition dawned slowly on Elizabeth's face, and Sarah watched as understanding and disbelief warred in her expression. But I don't understand. Why would the Queen Consort want to meet with me privately, and what does this have to do with security protocols?" Reached into her handbag and the leather journal, placing it gently on the table between them. "This belongs to me," she said. "It contains a story that I've never been able to tell about a decision I made when I was young and scared and convinced I was doing the right thing for everyone involved." Elizabeth stared at the journal, and Sarah could see her mind working to process what was happening. "I still don't understand." Elizabeth said, her voice barely above a whisper, 31 years ago, I gave birth to a daughter. I was 26 years old, my marriage was falling apart, and I was in love with a man I couldn't publicly acknowledge. I made the decision to place my baby daughter for adoption because I believed she would have a better life with parents who could give her the stability and love that I couldn't provide at that time. The words hung in the air like a bridge spanning decades, waiting for Elizabeth to choose whether to cross it. Sarah watched the younger woman's face cycle through emotions: confusion, shock, denial, and finally, a glimmer of something that might have been recognition. "That's not possible," Elizabeth said slowly. "My parents told me about my adoption. They said my birth mother was a young woman who couldn't care for a child. They never mentioned anything about me being that young woman," finished gently. "Because they didn't know. The adoption was arranged privately with complete confidentiality for everyone involved. Robert and Helen Mitchell became your parents in every way that mattered, and they did exactly what I hoped they would do. They gave you a wonderful life." Elizabeth's hands trembled as she reached for her teacup, then thought better of it and clasped them in her lap instead. I need to understand. Are you telling me that you're my? "I'm telling you that I'm the woman who gave birth to you on March 15th, 1994, said. "Who held you for 3 precious days before placing you in the arms of people who could give you everything I couldn't. Who has thought about you every single day since then, wondering if you were happy, if you were healthy, if you ever thought about the woman who loved you enough to let you go." Sarah watched Elizabeth process this information, saw the moment when intellectual understanding gave way to emotional reality. Tears began to form in the younger woman's eyes, and she looked from to Sarah as if seeking confirmation that this wasn't some elaborate dream. "The security meeting was a pretense," Sarah explained gently. Her Majesty wanted to meet you privately, away from the palace and away from your official work, so that you could hear this story without any pressure or public scrutiny. But why now? Elizabeth asked, her voice thick with emotion. Why tell me this after all these years? Leaned forward slightly, and Sarah could see the desperation in her eyes to make Elizabeth understand. Because someone else has discovered the truth, she said. Someone has been investigating my past, asking questions about adoption records from that time period. They even approached your adoptive father 3 months ago. I realized that if this information is going to come to light, I wanted you to hear it from me first. Elizabeth was quiet for a long time, staring at the journal on the table. Finally, she looked up with eyes that held a mixture of pain and wonder. I used to have dreams, she said softly. When I was little, I would dream about a woman with sad eyes who would sing to me. Mom and Dad were wonderful parents, and they never made me feel like I was missing anything, but sometimes I would wake up from those dreams feeling like I had lost something precious. His composure finally broke, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I used to sing to you when you were inside me, she whispered. Celtic lullabies that my grandmother taught me. I sang to you during labor and for those 3 days when I held you, trying to memorize every detail of your face. The emotional dam burst then, and Elizabeth began to cry in earnest. Sarah felt like an intruder witnessing this private moment, but she understood her role as both witness and protector, ensuring that this reunion happened safely for both women involved. I don't know how to feel about this, Elizabeth said through her tears. I love my parents, my real parents, the ones who raised me and supported me and made me who I am. But there's this part of me that has always felt incomplete, like there was a piece missing that I could never quite identify. Robert and Helen Mitchell are your real parents, said firmly. They did everything that I couldn't do, everything that mattered. I'm not trying to replace them or take away from what they've given you. I just wanted you to know that there was never a day when you weren't loved, even by the woman who couldn't keep you. Elizabeth reached across the table and touched the journal with trembling fingers. May I read it? It's yours if you want it, said. But I want you to know that you don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not a relationship, not even continued contact. You have a beautiful life, a successful career, a family of your own. I don't want to disrupt any of that. I just wanted you to know the truth and to understand that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I've never regretted it because it gave you the chance to become the remarkable woman you are. Elizabeth opened the journal to a random page and read silently for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes held a depth of emotion that seemed to encompass all the years they had lost and all the possibilities that lay ahead. There's something I need to tell you, Elizabeth said. Last year, when I was appointed to the Education Initiative, I kept having this strange feeling that I belonged in those palace meetings, like I was supposed to be there. I dismissed it as professional pride, but now I'm wondering if it was something deeper. Smiled through her tears. You have always belonged wherever you choose to be, she said. That has nothing to do with bloodlines or royal connections. That comes from the strength and intelligence that Robert and Helen nurtured in you and from your own determination to make a difference in the world. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched mother and daughter begin to tentatively explore the connection that had been to them for 3 decades. They talked about Elizabeth's childhood, her education, her marriage to David, and the birth of her twin daughters. Shared stories about her own life, carefully edited to focus on the personal rather than the public, painting a picture of the woman behind the crown. I have one more thing for you, said as their tea grew cold and they began to empty around them. She took the small wooden box from her handbag and opened it to reveal the gold locket. This belonged to my mother, your grandmother. I always planned to give it to you, but I never had the chance. Elizabeth accepted the locket with reverent care, turning it over in her hands as if it were made of starlight. It's beautiful, she whispered. The pictures inside are of you, said. One from the hospital when you were 3 days old and one from your university graduation. I had someone take that second photograph from a distance. I was there that day in the back of the auditorium watching you receive your degree. The revelation that had witnessed one of the most important moments in Elizabeth's life without her knowledge seemed to crystallize something for both women. The love that had persisted across decades and distance, the connection that had somehow endured despite complete separation. As they prepared to part, Elizabeth reached across the table and took his hand. I need time to process all of this, she said, and I need to talk to my parents to make sure they understand that learning about you doesn't change how I feel about them, But I want you to know that I'm not angry about the choice you made. I can see the love behind it, and I understand how difficult it must have been. Take all the time you need, said, and know that whatever you decide about whether you want me in your life going forward, I will respect completely. Just knowing that you're happy and that you understand why I made the choices I made, that's more than I ever dared to hope for. As Sarah escorted them both safely she reflected on the privilege she had been given to witness this reunion. She had entered this situation as a security officer investigating a potential breach, but she was leaving as someone who had helped heal a wound that had been 30 years in the making. The secret was no longer a burden to be carried alone. Elizabeth now knew her history, had finally been able to explain her choice, and both women had been given the opportunity to decide what kind of relationship, if any, they wanted to build together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, from the mysterious person still investigating, past to the eventual public revelation of Elizabeth's identity, they would face them with truth on their side and the knowledge that love, even when expressed through sacrifice, had the power to endure across any distance.